What's going on with Japan? The Japanese are against foreigners and a woman prime minister. Now's the perfect time to take a look. I was just about to move to Japan. Apparently, there's no longer any point in not moving, it seems.
The rise of nationalism.
I decided just in time. I decided to move just in time. I had just decided to move. Suddenly, some nationalists appeared there. Everyone's like, well, let's get back to our roots for foreigners. I was just thinking about it. It's called the Anti-Foreign
Movement Act in Japan. Laws against foreigners and the first ever female prime minister. Maybe.
By the way, that's the question. Where are all those feminists who were screaming about how if women were in power, everything would be fine?
Hello, feel free to comment. You've heard the news, but in the end, it's not clear what's really going on in Japan right now, so I'll try to explain it clearly. Hello everyone, Totoricha with you. And in my 14 years of living in Japan, this is probably the most eventful time, since in the last 3 years alone we've had 3 prime ministers. And our new prime minister is Takai Chasnaya, the first female prime minister in history.
By the way, I'm curious what she'll do about deflation, because the previous prime minister, in my opinion, tried to artificially induce it. In short, he tried to artificially create inflation. It's absolutely ridiculous. Everyone was screaming about it in Japan, and I wonder what she'll do.
That's why some English language news portrayed this as a victory for feminism, since even in conservative Japan a woman came to power. And some news emphasized that she's a very right-wing politician who supports conservative traditional values and is against foreigners. So, a right-wing politician who is against foreigners. When did that ever happen in Japan? Do you remember? Some name starting with the letter X, I think, keeps popping up. Well, some name. And before I say what's true and what's not, I want to point out that the news often oversimplifies information to make headlines that are provocative and attention-grabbing. Therefore, to truly understand what's happening in Japan now, you need to understand how Japan is structured. Modern Japan is.
Well, they've left these houses piled up, damn it, and they're just sitting there. It's a
central monarchy. That is, there's an emperor, but he doesn't influence the country's political decisions, but rather serves as a symbol. And it's somewhat similar to Great Britain. It wasn't always like this. Previously, in Japan, the emperor was the highest authority, and he sometimes collaborated with the bakufu. This is the military authority that existed under the shogun. After the end of World War II, the emperor faded into secondary status, and the real power, which is precisely.
Yes, they now have, in short, the prime minister. But the funny thing is that, in essence, they still have this emperor. I think their last one is Naruhito, I think. The funniest thing, yes, Naruhito, Naru, you get it, right? The hints are clear, and damn, they're so vibey, I think. So, you're literally, well, enjoying yourself. You don't have to do anything, you're the emperor, and that's it. The
prime minister and parliament have practically become the ones who influence the country's decisions. That's why now, yes, we have a prime minister, but he doesn't make absolutely all the decisions.
Max, for you, the norms of feminism are a way for women to express their own point of view, yes.
Which somehow influence the country. He should do all this with. That's the whole
point of feminism, so that they can stand up for their point of view. That's the whole point of
voting with parliament. And parliament consists of a lower house and an upper house. The lower house usually makes various decisions and laws, and the upper house double-checks them and passes them. Besides the prime minister and parliament, there's also Nikaku. It's something like the prime minister's team, where they select new ministers for various areas, such as the economy, healthcare, defense, and so on. Therefore, when the prime minister changes, their entire team changes, which greatly influences the country's politics as a whole. There are also many different political parties in Japan. There's even a communist party, but the largest and most influential party is considered the Jiminto Party. This is the Liberal Democratic Party.
Well, that's not surprising, by the way.
And now the question. Who chooses the prime minister? The prime minister isn't elected by ordinary Japanese citizens, but by the Diet. That is, the Diet itself nominates candidates and votes for them.
So, you get. Wait, what do people vote for anyway? They
vote for people in the Diet. It doesn't work like the system in America, for example, where people vote for President Trump or Biden. We can only very indirectly influence who becomes prime minister, but we can't directly elect them. So who then chooses the people in the Diet? This isn't done by ordinary Japanese citizens, either, but by political parties. And only political parties can be elected by ordinary Japanese citizens. How does this work? there are different elections, where Japanese people vote for different political parties and their representatives and then look at the number of heads.
Now, some might say, that's absolutely right, cool, and fair. In fact, I can just imagine how much money is swirling around at the top of this parliament. What kind of active story is there with corruption and lobbying? You know, right, friends? You just come and say, listen, we have a party member coming out, don't you want to vote for him? Quote, that's the story. That's it, right? And we'll give you some money for it, for example. Hey, okay, come up with something. Of course, brother, let me come up with something. The number of
votes and the proportional number of votes are
better than ours. What I mean is that, with nuances, they still
give seats in parliament to these parties, and then the party representatives send various other people from their party to these places. That is, I
don't know, all elections, in my opinion, with the same one, everywhere you can get to the point that somewhere they lobbied for something, rigged the votes, and so on. But in all of this, I at least like this particular version of voting in America, simply because it's at least interesting as a show. That is, again, I admit that there are some obvious jokes there, but at least it's interesting to watch. Let's be honest, friends.
The more people voted for a party, the more seats this party will get in parliament. And depending on the mood and in society, these numbers of seats fluctuate quite frequently. That's why there are liberal sentiments, and there are conservative sentiments. And depending on this, we have completely different parliaments and completely different candidates for prime minister. Can
you compare them to us? But we, by the way, always have fair elections. We've never had any strange moments with vote drops in electoral seats. Never, guys. Never.
One of the big news stories this year was that the Sensato party, which had only 2 seats, increased to 15 seats. How much, guys, honestly, do we have? 90% for Putin or 120? This party's slogan is Japanese first. The Japanese are first, and they actively oppose immigration, but that's not the only reason for their increased popularity. They skillfully used social media and the media, promoting TikTok on viral topics that attract attention, thereby collecting a lot of votes from people who have grown tired of the Jaminto party, which has been leading for many years. Foreign news simply calls this an increase in nationalism, but from within Japan, it feels more like discontent and protest against the system that has governed Japan for many years, as well as the exploitation of people's fears. So it turns out that ordinary citizens can directly elect only city mayors, governors, prefectural governors, of which there are 47 in Japan, and also vote for various political parties. After that, they sort things out themselves. We have no direct influence.
So, roughly speaking, people elect only the players who are supposed to play a role in this,
to influence it. And when a prime minister is usually elected, a survey is conducted among ordinary citizens, asking, how much do you support the new prime minister?
Well, they'll say, no. They'll be like, okay, so what do we care? Quote,
even though it only took a woman to become prime minister in Japan, guys. That's it, that's the whole situation. He wasn't elected directly. And often these percentages, like 40% at the beginning, gradually get lower and lower if people don't like what the prime minister is doing. So, it was 40%, then it dropped to 20%, and Parliament starts thinking about whether this prime minister should probably be replaced with a new person. Now, when they did a survey, 74% of Japanese people who took the survey support the new idea of what the
best ideology is, and I can't tell you right away. I think it's quite possible, but if you look at the internet, it's literally a kitchen conversation over a beer. I don't think there's some kind of super universal best ideology that will suit everyone. Again, there are a lot of nuances that will hinder you in one way or another in any given situation. The
prime minister and the time.
Again, the size of the country, its population, you know, right? That is, the population they mean.
And they think she'll be a good leader of the country. And now that you have a rough idea of Japan's political system, and it's all very confusing, I hope it was clear what's going on in the country and how the new prime minister influences life here, especially the lives of foreigners. Some foreign news reports portray Takaichi as a very right-wing politician, citing her statements that she's against girls being able to keep their maiden name after marriage and also for protecting Japan from foreign influence, but watching her full interviews, they just can't.
Really?
Cut it out. I have a question. What does the right and left movement mean in politics? Basically, is she really a right-wing politician? And it turns out that these divisions were invented in France in the 18th century, when politicians sat on the right and left sides of parliament. Did
I understand correctly that politics started in my stream?
different opinions on various social issues. And nowadays, when people say left, they mean that the state should fully support people, especially the poor and vulnerable. Everyone should have equal opportunities. Social justice and equality are supported, along with support for minorities, higher taxes for the rich, less military activity and more diplomacy, and the protection of individual rights in general. By right is often meant the protection of tradition, security, and order, reduced taxes and bureaucracy, support for private business and the free market, a strong army, and national independence. It
Reminds me of something, yes.
As if there were.
states in pain.
But I disagree with the taxes. Taxes have increased, pizza has become a
Cautious immigration policy, and since these definitions of left and right were invented in Europe, they don't quite accurately describe Japanese politics. In Japan, politicians are often divided into takaha, hawks, and hatoha, doves, which seems to me much better and clearer than right and left. I'm always confused about which of them is right and which is left, and so they are hawks and doves. So, hawks are a more rigid, strict political position. Hawks advocate for strength, defense, and firmness in international relations. Examples of hawkish views include making Japan's economy strong and independent, increasing the military budget, and changing the Japanese constitution, especially Article 9, which prohibits having its own. So, it turns out, they've been focusing on this very topic for the past few years, because, well, they've been trying to save the economy for years now, by the way. The army is a hoax. Doves are truly just doves. They advocate a peaceful, moderate position, diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful cooperation. And they often oppose rewriting the constitution. Within any Japanese political party, there are both hawks and doves. And this chapel, she's from the Jiminto Liberal Democratic Party, the largest and most influential party in Japan, which has been electing our prime ministers for the past many years. But she considers herself a hawk, so she has a stronger and tougher position, but at the same time, it's hard to call her 100% right. A super conservative politician. For example, the fact that Taka is against keeping one's maiden name after marriage is sometimes presented as if she's for traditional values and for women being in the kitchen. But in reality, it's not that simple. In her long interview, she talked about this position from the outside, saying that she wants to protect kaseki. And kaseki is something like a Japanese family tree. That is, every Japanese man has a say.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of talk now about how a lot of foreigners come and start dating Japanese women, or vice versa, you know. And so this Japanese identity, it's just starting to disappear. And by the way, there are all sorts of memes about this topic, on Tiko Tokes, for example.
There's his family tree now. They
even showed, for example, Japan in 2000, Japan in 2050, and there's just some European family there.
Where his parents are registered, when, well.
They really do have problems with the birth rate, by the way. So, in fact, it's understandable that they're being a bit dramatic, but overall, they really do have a problem, that in 100 years, who knows what will happen if the trend doesn't change.
He was born, along with his brothers and sisters. And when you become an adult and get married, you leave your parents' family tree and create your own separate family tree somewhere in the world.
But I know which country doesn't have problems with the birth rate. India and also China. They don't have problems with the birth rate.
Your husband or wife, and in this one thing.
On the contrary, especially in China, they're trying to slow it down, like, dude, stop it, please. In China they introduced a law regarding, I think, a second child or something like that there are some kind of restrictions there. China already has all the surpros, and let the Chinese rewind back. China is getting into an interesting situation. First, they throw in the idea that, guys, we're having way too many babies. They impose all these restrictions and then they're like, okay, guys, that's it. Our birth rate has dropped again, we need to do something. You're like 2010. Well, there's a point, I won't lie. Thanks for correcting me, guys.
And the whole family must have the same last name on Andrew. That's why when someone gets married in Japan, either the wife takes her husband's last name, or the husband takes his wife's last name. It's not that women are obliged to take their husband's last name. But it often just happens that women take their husband's last name more often than their husbands take theirs. And since there's a system that works very well, keeping the old last name will be quite difficult without changing the whole system and breaking it. And that's why many Japanese politicians now aren't exactly against the
idea of a high birth rate of 6 on 1,000 women, if only they
Could.
By the way, I'm curious what the birth rate is in Africa in general. It seems to me that there's literally nothing to do in Africa. Just drink water and that's it.
But they don't know how to do it without ruining everything.
They just didn't have water before, guys, and they were looking for it and that's why they couldn't. And now they have everything, you know, say.
Okay, this is a joke. Obviously, everything is fine there, especially there in South Africa, in some areas. So, everything is very complicated in Japan. So this isn't considered from the outside as a restriction of women's rights or against girls being able to do this.
Although, if you go to, say, Nigeria or Niger, there's probably pizza there. Remember, we also looked at, I think, what Mauritania was like. In Mauritania, for sure, there's really nothing to do there except
keep an English surname. And from a security standpoint, countries, because they're afraid that changing the Kaseki family tree could somehow affect various fake IDs, name changes, spies, and so on. That's why they take this very seriously, especially the Hawks and, of course, the policy regarding foreigners.
Anyway, I've come up with an idea. Look, we just need to take everyone's phones away, and people will do what they'll do it. Just make me president, I'll raise Russia's demographics for you. I'll just ban phones for a week. That's it, that's all.
I think some of you might have heard the news that Japan will
revolt. Yeah, dudes, you didn't revolt when YouTube was blocked. Damn it, what are you drinking? Be patient with this too.
tighten business visa requirements for foreigners, or that it's now harder for foreigners to get a driver's license in Japan. That's true, by the way. Getting a business visa in Japan used to be pretty easy. You needed to have around 5 million yen in capital. That's about $35,000. And
how will you know to use the phone? So I'll have like Half-Life and, in short, huge balls flying around that will spy on people. Just spying on people. Well, this is for your safety, guys, so that you don't get caught by Ukrainian hackers, I don't know, or some random foreign influence doesn't descend on you. So, guys, this is all for your safety, in no way for the sake of control. And there were people who misused this opportunity and created fakes. Don't tell him to forgive computers. He shouldn't have said that we'll ban computers for a week too. You're a
business. Of course, everything will go down with us, and you won't even be able to buy anything. But in short, our country will simply stop working for a week. There will simply be a blackout, and you'll really have to eat. You won't have a choice, you understand? Either way, they say there were a lot of people from China in particular who did this and squeezed Japan with their whole family. And that's why in this October, they raised their capital to $200,000, about $30 million, if I'm not mistaken, so there would be fewer of these fake ones. That's not scary. What are you talking about? 2 worthless businesses and the same driver's license. Japan used to have a written test of 10 questions, and you only needed 7 of them. It would be right to change it now so that the test is like the Japanese one. I think it would be 40 questions. That's why people like this. The closer they get to the state, the crazier its laws. They're stupid. What's the problem? There were changes this October, but the fact is, it wasn't Takaichiya who introduced these changes. She wasn't even prime minister when these laws were passed. It was the previous prime ministers, and parliament decided that it needed to be tightened up a bit, because not many foreigners actually came and lived in Japan before. And many things were overlooked, so it turns out there's a loophole here. It turns out they can exploit it anyway. The Japanese, they didn't think of this, but the Chinese did. That's why they're gradually trying to close these loopholes somehow. Keikasana has definitely already introduced something. She created a new cabinet to support the peaceful life of the Japanese and foreigners living in Japan. That's if you translate it literally. And the new minister in this cabinet is Onoda Kimi, a girl who is half Japanese, half American. And it seems to me that for Japan it's a sensation that a person with such a background became a minister for such a cabinet.
But otherwise, everything is turning out fine. You can survive in Japan. It was in vain to panic. That's it, we're moving, guys. You see, even Americans are doing it there. Oh, wait, nothing has changed. Well, never mind.
And Onoda Kimi is also very popular among many Japanese. She's considered more of a hawk and supports a strong, patriotic Japan. But
oh, what will happen if she unclenches her fist? Oh.
This is my opinion. She most likely knows what it's like to grow up in Japan when you don't look like other Japanese. So I'm really curious what kind of reforms they'll introduce next to ensure that there's this peaceful life between Japanese and foreigners, and everyone is happy in the end. I also have foreign roots. The actions of some foreigners create the impression that everyone is bad. This can lead to a bad reputation. It's important to respond clearly to those who don't follow the rules and laws. We need to show society that foreigners living in Japan live according to the law. I think this is extremely important. Also, this is
mainly the case with violators, I don't know, of the rules, well, seriously. After they blocked Positophone's channel, now I feel like, well, I'm everywhere on the internet, really, I was in Japan all the time, Indians are suffering there, I'm slandering. Specifically, well, I don't know, Pakistanis, Indians, well, I don't really differentiate between them, but it's their specific. And even we were sitting on the subway, Indians would be sitting there, screaming.
Lately, there's been a lot of talk in the news about how, with 202,
And also African Americans. And the African American guys there, they lure you into all sorts of basements, saying, want some tea? I'm like, no.
Starting in 207, foreigners who don't pay health insurance and a pension may be denied visa extensions. This isn't something new, the previous prime minister already talked about it. Health insurance and a pension are mandatory for everyone in Japan. Therefore, this is considered a necessary measure for.
Well, I shouldn't have drunk tea with them. Great, that same tea, where a bottle of water costs, I think, 5,000 E. To put it in perspective, that's 2,500 rubles.
A decision by those who disobey the law. To me, this looks more like a small performance to show that we are now being stricter with foreigners in order to reduce unrest among the Japanese population and, as a result, create the feeling that foreigners in Japan are a select few who obey all the laws and you have nothing to blame them for. And the last thing is my personal opinion. I often see Japanese politics being compared to politics.
They gave it away for free. We talk about water in a cafe, and not about the nephros of Shinjuku in
America or Europe. And they say that in Europe, everything has become so bad, so many immigrants, so many Muslims. Japan should learn from Europe's example, that everything is so bad. And in reality, Japan has completely different problems. Yes, perhaps Japan is learning something from America and Europe, but Takaichi Sanai was chosen mainly because she focuses on the unique problems of Japan. For example, stagnation. Japan has been experiencing deflation for many years, 30 years. When labor efficiency does not increase, prices and wages do not increase either. And her policies are mainly aimed at improving Japan's economy. And that's why she is so popular among many Japanese surveyed. So the next time you see flashy news headlines, remember that often the news is just trying to get your attention, rather than give you full information from different angles. This applies even more to various TikTok reels and YouTube shorts.
In short, it's clear. It turns out the woman didn't ruin anything. I'm upset. The argument in favor of everything has disappeared.